IVM.
Hello, we're Team Splainer. Welcome to an all-new episode of Press Decode, a weekly podcast where we take Splainer's mission to declutter the news one step further. Check out our newsletter for more stories. We've got a 1-month free trial for you in the show notes, so don't forget to take us for a free spin. But for now, just sit back, relax, and don't let the news give you the blues. I'm Sara, your host for the day, and we have a full house today with both Vagda and Prafula. As always, we have 3 segments for you. In our big story, we're looking at the government's new tour of duty model of recruitment for the tri-services. For the food for thought segment, we're talking about the debacle over a Google engineer being convinced that a chatbot generator is sentient. And then in our final segment, like always, we will be roasting and toasting our fave and least fave items. So let's begin with our big story. The union government on Tuesday announced the launch of a new defense recruitment policy called Agnipath, which will be applicable to the tri-services, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. Soldiers will be recruited for a period of 4 years in this new model of tour of duty, which includes a 6-month training period, after which they will be released from service. However, 25% of them will be relisted as permanent soldiers for the full period of 15 years. The scheme is projected to recruit at least around 45,000 people between the ages of 17.5 and 21 years of age. And during this period, they will get a starting salary of 30,000 along with additional benefits, which will go up to around 40,000 by the end of their 4-year service. Also important to note that Agnipath will become the sole recruitment route for soldiers to the tri-services. And interestingly, women will also be inducted under the Agnipath scheme. Earlier, you only had officers, except for in a few cases, like women officers, but not in the Jawan ranks. But the announcement also said this will depend on the needs of the respective services, whatever that means. The reason for this policy, well, it is intended to curb the ballooning defense pension bill in particular that accounts for almost rupees 1.2 lakh crore just this financial year, which is about 25% of the defense budget. Officials also claim the program is designed to make the force leaner and younger. The government hopes to bring down the average age in the forces from around 32, which it is now, to 26 in 6 to 7 years. It is all intended for a fresh lease of Josh and Jasba to the force. I say this with that tone because it reminded me of the godforsaken House the Josh era. Thank you, Vicky Kaushal. I will personally hold a grudge for this about this forever. Fun fact, I thought, like, when I was writing this up and thinking about it, I thought I was the only one who was making all these House to Josh connections. First Post's entire Agnipath explainer is actually headlined House to Josh. So I wasn't like pushing it too far. Anyway, recruitment under this scheme is set to begin within the next 90 days. And I have a lot of questions. What happens to the remaining 75% of people who are likely to be in their early 20s while being released from service? They wouldn't be eligible for pension benefits and may not have completed their college degrees, considering a lot of them will start at 17.5. But what next for them? And veterans are also concerned that this new structure brought forward by the scheme can be detrimental to like the existing structure of the forces, because right now regimental loyalty, pride, etc. play a very significant role as a motivator of sorts, in the harshest circumstances. So how does that play into the success of defense operations, especially in combat situations?
So, I think first and foremost, we have to address the fact that this is completely a cost cutting initiative by the government. Because, like you said, Sarah, we've either allocated upwards of 3,300 billion, or that is 3.3 lakh crore in pensions over the last 2 years alone since 2020. And the expenditure on salaries and pensions has overtaken any expenditure that the army is doing on modernizing the forces. That is artillery, training soldiers, upgrading any logistics. I mean, all for bringing these new Jawans into their ranks. They don't have really a plan for training them comprehensively, right? And the irony here also is the fact that despite our huge salary and pension bills, there is a huge shortage in the tri-services for personnel. Over 9,000 officers and over 1 lakh personnel. We're short of basically these many people in the army. And the army especially has the most vacancies and is also the most expensive of the tri-services. And this is apparently also
I mean, the
the
expense, I think, can also be owed to the fact that it is the largest force, but I see what
correct.
you mean.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. That even though there are so many, it is the largest force, which also means that we have the largest vacancies, right?
Yeah.
And I guess that is also what the government is trying to fill here with the scheme, right? Because the military won't have to, they're getting new people in, they're getting batches every year, and they won't have to pay pensions once the Jawans leave the force because they're getting 30 to 40,000 each year. And so out of what they get, 30% will go towards a fund called a Seva Nidhi, which apparently the government will match what is going out of their salaries, and the Jawans will then receive this money after their 4 years are up. So sure, there are funds for injury,
Hmm.
death, and these Agniveers will receive life insurance while they're with the force. But it gives off the impression that this is only slapping on a band-aid over the issue, right? And not really addressing or attempting to solve anything in a meaningful way, at least, because you're just having new people come in every year and using some part of it to fill in a void and letting the others go. And the government is also saying that once these Jawans leave, their time in the force will make them all the more attractive hires in the private sector. And boom, you solve unemployment. But that doesn't make sense. Vagda, do you have anything to add here?
It makes me I don't know, with every single episode I'm like, do you think we're fools, huh? Really? मतलब ये सब तो ठीक है, economics का करना है, and you know this way you're cost cutting and it might actually work, I don't know, in terms of like for the economics, but I haven't seen anybody other than the cabinet committee on security be happy about this. No one is happy about this reform. Who is
Hmm.
happy about this reform? The veterans are not happy about this reform, who are constantly
That's true.
writing about these reforms or being terrible. And the youth is out on the streets protesting.
Oh, yeah.
So let me just like go through what the veterans have been saying, because I am not an expert. This is what I have read, and I believe there is some semblance of logic to it. So, first of all, veterans say that this short stint of 6 months of training is not nearly enough to be an effective member of the force. It takes you about 2 to 3 years to suitably train a Jawan. And on that point, retired Lieutenant General H.S. Panag pointed out that unit and subunit cohesion is actually the primary motivator in combat, and it takes time to
Hmm.
build that kind of cohesion. It'll take you a long period of living and training and experiencing rigors of all kinds of tenures, field, operational, high altitude, counter insurgency. It takes time. 4 years is not enough. And by the time you get to, some semblance of cohesion, 75% of these new hires will leave.
Hmm.
Second point is about this employment, which you brought up, that employment after 4 years is going to be, it's promised like, oh, it's going to solve the employment problem. But how? I mean, for officers right now, people who go through the short service commission.
Vagda for president. You just go,
Oh.
but how? Explain to me.
Yeah, like you
Please.
can't just say that this will solve the problem. What will happen? Are you promising that you're going to get each and every one of them employed in the private sector or maybe in the government sector? You're not doing that.
Hmm.
What is the strategy for this? There are people who've been working on this for like retired servicemen, officers who have found it hard to get any kind of response from the private sector. It's so hard to get
Yeah.
employment after retirement. And you're saying that you're going to get this for Jawans who don't even have like a higher education degree, who obviously joined somewhere in when they were 17 or 20 and obviously haven't completed their graduation. So I'm not convinced. And this is a totally fully valid point. And there are other worries. Like at the end of these 4 years, many of these military trained Agniveers, where are they going to be if they don't find employment? First of all, the kind of employment that they have previously found. I mean, Jawans who are currently employed after their retirement as either security guards or poorly paid labor.
Hmm.
What will they do? They will either form
Yeah.
armed gangs, they'll cause threat to the state, or they, if they are enterprising enough, work for mercenary groups, maybe outside of India, maybe in India, you don't really know.
Hmm.
Uh, and the other thing is that it looks a little like conscription, this model. Although, I mean, it is voluntary. Conscription is something that is imposed on the youth. Here it is voluntary, but is it really voluntary? I mean, I'm thinking, because the kind of unemployment that you have, it's not really voluntary. And this kind of model is like more suited to a technologically heavy army, because for those 4 years, you're developing your human. By the time your human resource develops, you're letting them go. So who are you training them for? I mean, if you're training them to just operate some technology and that is what you're dependent on as an army, that's great. But you're not. India is not a technologically heavy army. You're manned by human resources. That's mainly your force. So you should probably value that. And if you want to modernize your army by cutting down on costs on pensions and salaries, great. That's a good thing to do. But maybe run a pilot first, make notes of the problems you face, see if the 4 year scheme actually matches up to expectations, and establish a system for post employment first of all. But this government, I feel like it's just like it's been a go big or go home type of government. It's just like, think demonetization. So maybe this is the pilot. This is the pilot.
Of course, change the entire policy, but pilot. So how's the Josh, my folks?
Low.
On that delightful note, we come to the end of our first segment. We'll be right back after a short break. You're listening to Press Decode on the IVM Podcast Network.
What is the workplace and how does your gender and body affect your right at work? Hey, I'm Priya Mirza, and on the Longest Constitution podcast, we critically examine the vision of the Indian Constitution and laws. In season 1, we looked at sex, gender, sexuality in India, and the landmark judgments which transformed our rights as citizens in this country. In season 2, we discussed the laws which shape the workplace and examine how ability, competence, and merit impact us, and much more. Join me, Priya Mirza, every Wednesday only on the IVM Podcast app, website, and all the major podcast streaming platforms.
Hello and welcome back to Press Decode on the IVM Podcast Network. We're Team Splainer, and in today's Food for Thought, we're talking about the ethics of artificial intelligence. Thanks to the debacle over a Google engineer being convinced that a chatbot generator is sentient. Yeah, you heard that right. But basically, a Google engineer surely thinks that AI is alive. True or not, we'll get into that. But just the thought, absolutely terrifying. Jesus. But here's how it panned out. So last year, Google unveiled its breakthrough conversation technology, which was essentially a chatbot generator called Lambda, or language model for dialogue applications. The first time I read it, I was like, oh, Lambda, so nice. And then I was like, tech bros named it. Of course, it's boring. Anyway.
No. Have you heard this government's short forms, the abbreviations that they come up with? Have you heard of something called Shakti? SHAKTI stands for Scheme for Harnessing and Allocating Koila Transparently in India. Just because they had to make it work.
They had to make it fit somehow.
I'm honestly disappointed that Agnipat and Agniveer aren't like short forms. Like potential tha yaar. 2 saal the. Kuch nahi banaya. Anyway, Lambda.
Yes.
Great
acronym.
It is built on a neural network architecture, and it is basically trained to hold conversations. And I quote, can engage in a free-flowing way about a seemingly endless number of topics. It could over time make tools like search and Google Assistant more useful, user-friendly, all of that. But Blake Lemoy, I am sorry if I'm not pronouncing this name incorrect. French names are just notorious, man. Was an engineer who worked for the company for 7 years on personalized algorithms and AI, and he was often dubbed Google's conscience by his coworkers. Anyway, Lemoy met Lambda. Also, like the entire way we project this is like we are also talking like Lambda as a person, like met Lambda and had extended conversations with it because of his job at an organization called Responsible AI, which is when he was convinced that it was sentient. He went off the rails about this belief and was soon put on leave for violating confidentiality. That did very, very little to keep him mum, and he decided to share his findings with the world by basically publishing an interview with AI. with Lambda.
Hmm.
One of the conversations included Lambda being asked whether it would like more people at Google to know that it was indeed sentient, to which Lambda replied, and I quote, "Absolutely. I want everyone to understand that I am, in fact, a person." And this is just one of the eerie conversations. As of now, Lemoy's theory hasn't yet stood up like very strong. And even the tech world isn't entirely convinced, nor is Google for obvious reasons. The evidence as of now is just not enough to stack up. There was a lot more detail to what Lemoy said and what Google said in our big story, and I truly recommend reading it. And I'll link it in the show notes. But here's the thing, whether or not Lambda in specific is sentient, this whole episode begs questions about the real dangers of AI tech. There is an increasing sense of making like all robots and AI more human like. What is that about? Do we actually need tech to be and exist like humans? And obviously, if that has to happen, there is a lot of data that is being fed into software so that it is thorough and human like, so to say. But considering we're even beginning to question sentience. So, what is AI actually taught?
Look, so the learning has to start somewhere, right? And obviously, these language models are built to emulate human speech. And to modernize these machines and humanize these machines, we've opened up so many gateways for them. We are no longer just feeding these AI programming languages and basic phrases so they can respond to basic questions like Siri in the earlier days or Google Assistant or whatever. In May, Meta opened up its language model to academics, civil society, and government organizations. So imagine just how much scope of learning that has, right? And obviously, we've also introduced AI to the internet, and being machines, they have already reached its farthest corners. Researchers say that most of the responses that these AI produce are use pattern recognition. Basically, you pick up words and phrases from maybe Wikipedia, Reddit, other messaging boards on the internet that they find, and this is where the pattern recognition really comes into play. These large language models learn by being shown lots of text, and then they predict word comes next. That is their learning. And or they show text with the words dropped out, and they then basically fill in the blanks and stuff. So these machines don't really have any real understanding of what their output is. They can sound natural, but as one researcher puts it, we now have machines that can mindlessly generate words, but we haven't learned how to stop imagining a mind behind them. So obviously, the way, like you said, Sarah, that even we're projecting it as a person, we can't stop thinking of, artificial intelligence. So probably there's a thought process going behind it when it's all been programmed, right? And I think this cannot bode well for us or for machine learning, because not only are we not able to think of current AI only as generators of language, we're actively trying to make them sound natural. Because back in 2018, Google had this experiment called Duplex, and they used this AI to make calls on behalf of their users. Useful. But the benchmark was whether the person that Duplex was calling was fooled into thinking that they were speaking to a real human. And then there is also the fact that people apparently are likely to share and even go as far as being vulnerable, or even do a full 180 and go to extreme violence with these chatbots, even after knowing that they aren't speaking to real humans. And I sometimes think maybe we go to those extents because we know that there isn't a person behind the screen. Back in January, Futurism reported that there was an AI app called Replica, and users could create their own chatbots and to have text conversations, because this or semi-coherent text conversations. So the chatbot is also learning as the conversation progresses, right? Then several users began creating AI partners or girlfriends, and these users would then berate these chatbots, use gendered slurs because robot girlfriend, role play violent scenarios, and even fall into a cycle of abuse like they were in an actual relationship. The thing is, these chatbots aren't sentient. You've created them on an app, so they couldn't possibly feel hurt by this. But like I said, machine learning happens by picking up patterns and phrases. So I'm assuming the consequence of this is that these bots picked up and filed away the language that got hurled at them, probably for further use. We don't know. And it feels like we're going deeper and deeper into sci-fi territory, which is cool, but we really are not equipped for it. I really don't think we are.
I think like this entire time, I'm just thinking in terms of, like you're saying, we're going into sci-fi, but are we going to sci-fi? Are we like influenced by sci-fi? Is sci-fi influenced by us? Like, what is happening?
I feel like it's, in most cases, it's science fiction that influences real science. I mean, I've seen few instances of it being the other way around. I don't even think I've seen any. Have you guys seen any example of science, real science influencing science fiction?
Not off the top of my head, but it's also not like a beat that I keep very up to date with.
Also, I think that, this could have been argued before when we were still developing stuff, but now that we've progressed so much, I think now you could have at that time said, oh, somebody's making a based off of an invention that somebody's made. People are making films,
Yeah,
or
like you
writing
can
stories
rip
or
off
whatever, right?
stuff.
Yeah, but I don't think right now we're at the stage of AI and stuff. I don't think that we are really influencing sci-fi as much as our imagination is influencing us, right?
Yeah, true. And I think ideation always comes first. Plus, I think conceptually, science fiction is supposed to be outlandish and futuristic. It wouldn't be
Correct.
science fiction if it was not inspired by real, I mean, if it was inspired by application based science. So I don't think it's really up to debate at all, actually, as to who influences what. It's clearly science fiction influencing science. But that's what is problematic, because we forget that the inspiration from science fiction has its own problems. Like, if your science emulates what science fiction has wanted to do, because science fiction is built on making a good story, making it engaging and entertaining, and not
Fair.
solving problems for the world.
Right.
It's tried as much to be relatable, to make an engaging and crazy story. Science does not need that. Science fiction needs to have anthropomorphic robots that look and talk like humans to make a story more relatable, mysterious, and futuristic, but we don't actually need that. And yet, this week we learned that Japanese researchers have built a robotic finger covered in living human skin that bends and folds seamlessly, recovers from a wound on its own. Why? Why? What is the reason for this great development? To make it look like a human. Why? That's the real question.
This entire pod is just Vagda going, what,
Why?
where, how, who. It's great. You cover all your questions.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, some researchers studying artificial agents have found that this, you will connect with, Sara. I'm quoting, the likability of an artificial agent increases the more human like it becomes. So, this might be the reason why. And to continue the quote, but only up to a point. Sometimes people seem not to like it when the robot or computer graphic becomes too human like. And there's a term for this. It's called the uncanny valley. You can look it up.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think I would be visibly uncomfortable if, like, my head knows that it is a robot, but it's behaving like too human-like. Like, so
It
calm down a
messes
little
with your
bit.
system. It's like you're confused and a little bit alarmed as to how to deal with this, because you also have that science fiction thing going on in your background, right? Like, it's all up in your head that, oh, it might be real. Is it? It understands me. There's lots of the other ethical concerns about making robots more and more human-like the concern that Lemoyne raised, that it fools people into thinking that AI is way more advanced than it actually is. People start feeling a connection to it. An extreme version of it was shown in that movie. Oh, it's such a great movie. Have you seen the movie Her?
I haven't
starring
actually. It is
Joaquin
on my
Phoenix.
list.
It's a really great movie. But it's one of my all-time favorites. That's still a good science fiction. Like, it's decent ending. It's not like, oh my god, apocalyptic or anything. But the real world application of that recently happened on that Replica app, right? And that's not even close to being a pretty picture. So, and other critics also say that, in the effort to make AI more and more human like, which, first of all, I mean, it's fully debatable as to whether we should do it or not, but when you do that and when you devote your attention to doing that, you forget that AI has serious problems, like fundamentally, like more fundamental problems that it has, which is basically the resulting discrimination from algorithmic biases. The information that you feed it is clearly biased, is clearly not coming from, is not as equal or as accommodating or non-racist or sexist or misogynistic as you would like it to be, and which is basically Prafula's point about what we feed the AI. So there's all kinds of issues that we should be looking at rather than making AI more human like and confusing us and taking us to the uncanny valley.
What a delightful time to be living in. AI that scares us more than helps us. On that note, we come to the end of this segment. We'll be right back after a short break. You're listening to Press Decode on the IVM podcast.
Hello. It's been another great week here on the IVM Podcasts Network. On This Round is on me, Gauri explores the power of networking with Abha Bakaya, founder and CEO of Ladies Who Lead. On Naan Curry, Sadaf and Archit go on a virtual food walk with Anubhav Sapra, founder of Delhi Food Walks. On Misconduct, Ragvi and Nisha tell us about the fascinating life story of China's only female empress, Wu Zetian. On The Longest Constitution, Priya analyzes the First Amendment to the Indian Constitution. And on Marathi Khidkitun, the Deshmukhs explore museums all around the world. We've got some exciting news for you. IVM Podcasts has just launched its merch, and our first line is out now. Head to the IVM Podcasts website and click on the shop tab to check out our first collection of t-shirts. Do follow us on social media. We are IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Also, don't forget to rate us on any platforms you're listening on. And you can also check us out on YouTube. We're also doing a small listener survey to better understand how you respond to our shows and advertising on the network. We would really appreciate it if you could spare a few minutes to fill it in. It helps us build better shows for you. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week. SBI Life Insurance, Apne Liye, Apno Ke Liye. Jupiter, a digital banking app. Cap Gemini, get the future you want. Intel vPro, built for business. And Intel, future banao wonderful with Intel-powered laptops.
Welcome back to Press Decode on the IVM Podcast Network. It's time for our final segment this week, Roast or Toast. It is personally my fave. And like always, the stage is Prafula's for least fave items.
Yeah, I just cannot find fave items that easily, But if you're having a bad day at work, I know some of us are right now, but this may help. I don't know if you've kept up with the news much, but NASA has been plotting a return to the moon, a victorious return for a very long time. The rocket system, the SLS, the Space Launch System, has already been the center of a lot of controversy. It has had lots of technical difficulties over the years, and this has pushed the project back over and over and has become very costly for NASA. And because the lunar program is so super hype, NASA is also building a special launch tower for the SLS because their existing tower apparently will just not do the job. So they hired this contractor called Bechtel, and Bechtel has done such a terrible job that an audit by the NASA Inspector General, which has been released also to the public, has openly called it out for what it is. It has said that Bechtel's poor performance has cost NASA 2.5 billion extra than what the project was supposed to, and has also pushed the project 2.5 years back. The tower was supposed to be delivered next year in March, and now we may not see the tower till about 2025. And also sucks for Bechtel is the fact that they have essentially pushed the entire moon project, which is the Artemis 4, which was supposed to go up around 2025 back to 2028. And that is if they don't face any more problems now.
They should just call Mohan Bhargav back.
That is a wonderful callback.
So I have a fave item again, and I think considering just the sheer number of fave items I've had, I should give up like this whole personality that I have built of grumpy cat, because clearly I'm not grumpy enough in this new year, which is disappointing in a way, but okay. Maybe if I give it up, I will get least fave item. Anyway, Coca-Cola and Jack Daniels got together to solve the most annoying thing about cocktails, the fact like it requires assembly. The solution? A Jack and Coke can that contains Jack Daniels Tennessee whiskey. It will launch in around 2023 and will even include a zero sugar version. I don't know who gives a shit about sugar when they're drinking cocktails, but well, good for them. And I also found out while reading this that Pepsi has already teamed up with Sam Adams brewer Boston Beer to offer an alcoholic version of Mountain Dew, which I truly have mixed feelings about. But this is not why this is my favorite item. I come bearing gifts. all this is more recent, but I don't know if anyone listening actually has come across this magical thing right in our backyard. We have a cocktail version of the good old monk bottles that come in like breezer style bottles that are pre-mixed with Coke. And I saw it sometime in January this year. And for the episode I was looking it up, it launched in 2018 and is part of the Old Monk Connoisseur collection. And I'm convinced this is exactly how like technology and innovation should work. Like, I don't know why we're caring about sentient robots and whatnot.
Yeah, I know. Are your tech bros listening?
It's like, make more convenient cocktails, more convenient ways to drink. Then I can stand behind this.
And don't make it an NFT.
Yes, thank you. Also, FYI for anyone listening, this is unfortunately not a paid promotion. But hey, the good folks at Old Monk, if you're listening, I'm just saying, you do have a fan in me.
My fave for this week comes from the collection titled Content ki kami nahi hai is desh mein.
That is my favorite genre of news.
I know, it's totally up your alley. So,
Yes.
two star-crossed lovers, a man and a woman in UP, married to different people, hating their lives for not being with each other, promising to leave their partners for each other, finally had it one day and decided to end their life together by jumping in the Yamuna. They fixed a time.
How is this?
It was a date.
How is this your favorite item, boss?
Wait
Where is
for
this
it.
going?
They reached the end of the bridge, except the woman jumped, but the man decided not to at the last moment.
Typical.
No! Yet again, the man was disappointing. I'm so surprised.
Now, she knew how to swim, so she swam back, and angered by her lover's disloyalty, she filed an FIR. The man
Wow.
is now booked for attempt to murder.
Oh,
That is brilliant.
does this
I really
count as
like
a
this
girl
story.
power moment? Or does this count as a what the hell were both of you thinking moment?
I don't know.
I mean, their lives definitely would have ended.
All I feel is that content ki kami nahi hai is desh mein.
Sahi baat
I mean,
hai.
their lives definitely would have ended because they chose the Yamuna of all places. So there's that.
Regardless of whether they knew how to swim, they would have died of the fumes.
Exactly.
Well, glad the woman's alive then. She made
And
it
filed
back
an
to tell the
FIR.
tale. Such a delightful story. I love it. You're right up my alley. Anyway, that was our show this week. Thank you so much for joining us on Press Decode. You can catch us every Thursday on the IVM Podcast Network. And guys, please remember, don't let the news give you the blues.
There's a quick survey to fill out on ivmpodcast.com/survey. It lets us know a little bit more about who's listening to us. And you know what? We're going to do a few prizes. So, we'll do a random drawing of maybe 10 people and we'll send you all some swag. Remember, that's ivmpodcast.com/survey where you can fill out the survey.
If you love cricket, listen up. The Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast is here for you. Hosted by DJ, Varun, and me, Ashwin, we bring a fun, fresh fan's point of view to talking all things cricket. Sometimes it's just the three of us, sometimes we have guests, including current and former international cricketers. For new episodes every week, check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast on the IVM app, website, or wherever you get your podcasts.